Welcome to the Scientific Sense podcast, where we explore emerging ideas from science, policy, economics, and technology. My name is Gill Eapen. We talk with world's leading academics and experts about their recent research or general areas of topical interest. Scientific Sense is an unstructured conversation with no agenda or preparation. We cover a wide variety of domains where new discoveries are made and new technologies are developed on a daily basis. We are most interested in how new ideas affect society and help educate the world how to pursue a rewarding and enjoyable life rooted in science, logic, and information. We seek knowledge without boundaries or constraints and provide unedited content of conversations with researchers and leaders who love what they do. A companion blog to this podcast can be found at scientificsense.com, and this podcast is available on over a dozen platforms and directly at scientificsense.net. If you have suggestions for topics, guests, and other ideas, please send them to info@scientificsense.com, and I can be reached at gill@eapen.info. My guest today is Professor Andrew Ching, who is a professor in the Carey Business School at the Johns Hopkins University, where he is cross-appointed to the Department of Economics and the Bloomberg School of Public Health. He is currently serving as an associate editor for Management Science and a member of the editorial boards for Marketing Science and Journal of Marketing Research. His research focuses on developing new empirical structural models and estimation methods to understand the forward-looking strategic learning and bounded rational behavior of consumers and firms. Welcome, Andrew.
Thanks very much, Gill.
Yeah, so I want to start with one of your papers, Identification and Estimation of Forward-Looking Behavior, the Case of Consumer Stockpiling, in which you say understanding how forward-looking consumers respond to price promotions in storable goods markets is an important area of research in empirical marketing and industrial organization. In prior work, researchers have assumed that consumers in these markets are very forward-looking and they calibrated their weekly discount factors to levels around 99.95%. And this calibration has been used because earlier research has assumed that the consumer storage cost is a continuous function of inventory, which rules out exclusion restrictions that can be used to identify the discount factor. So this is looking at price promotions, but I guess this could have some extensions to lack of availability related things too, right? I'm thinking about COVID and toilet paper and things like that. Do you want to talk a bit about that?
Yes, I can say a few words about that. As you mentioned, my paper with Matthew Osborne, Professor Matthew Osborne at the University of Toronto. And by the way, prior to my position at Johns Hopkins, I was at the University of Toronto. And so that's how we started the project. Our emphasis is on consumer stockpiling decisions. A few months ago, we all experienced the scary moment of not able to find toilet papers,
Right.
Not to mention disinfectants, sprays or something like that. And a lot of other things, basic supplies, so that to what we are doing, and it has a lot to do with those expectations about the future. So one thing that drives our decisions on how much you want to buy in each occasion is a function of so first how far ahead you think, right? That's what our discount factor try to measure. And in addition, what would be the price look like a few periods later, a
Yeah.
few weeks later, and also whether you will find it on the shelf.
Right.
Now, typically, that availability is not really a concern.
Hmm.
Right? You go to the supermarket, how often you will really find your favorite brand is out of stock. I mean, you find, we encounter that, but it's really not that often.
Hmm.
But now, the out of stock is almost like it's equivalent to the price becomes really high.
Right.
And so if you anticipate that down the road, a few weeks later or even a few months later, you are not going to be able to find, or very difficult to find, this item on the shelf, which almost like translated to the shadow price for those products becomes very high.
Yeah.
Then it will lead to our behavior to stockpile as much as possible when you see it, and so the panic buying behavior, to some degree, I think it can be rationalized using our model.
Yeah.
Explain it in terms of this kind of forward-looking behavior.
Right. And so there are multiple things there. So one is, how far does the consumer look, and how does she essentially, let's say, just looking at pricing. Presumably, the consumer has to forecast future price, right? And then
Yes.
make a decision based on that. And I guess into that will go considerations around how much storage space is available, what the use intensity is going to be, and so on. So the consumer takes all this information and makes a decision. You say the previous studies assume that the storage cost is a continuous function of inventory. And
Yes.
so the discount rate that they came up with, 99.95%, you're arguing that that would be different if you kind of relax those assumptions.
That's right. Yeah. So just, that argument is a little technical, but I can basically tell you,
Yeah.
Because of that assumption, which is really a simplification for modeling viewpoints, it will make the models easier to solve by assuming that how our storage cost is it decreases as you consume your inventory, and now, unfortunately, that assumption actually rule out what we call the identification power, or some identification information in the data. And so in the past research, researchers actually give up in estimating how forward-looking consumers are. So when they build these kind of models, they would just assume, that's what we meant, they just assume that people are very forward-looking. They think about, they plan years ahead. And if we're talking about savings decisions, consume how much you want to save and how much you want to put aside for retirement, that's very reasonable, right? If you're thinking about retirement savings, you're thinking many years ahead. But if you're thinking about grocery shopping, like buying toilet papers, buying laundry detergent, I kind of doubt that people are planning years ahead.
Right. Yeah.
Right. They may be planning weeks ahead.
They might be planning now, but
so,
in
I mean,
general
in the pandemic,
situation.
they may suddenly become more forward-looking.
Right.
But still, it's not like years ahead, right?
Sure.
Maybe 1 year ahead.
Yeah.
So what we are basically arguing is make a more reasonable assumptions about how the storage cost with consumption. Okay. We can actually get and be incorporated in our model, and use that features in our model to do the estimation. We actually get a much more realistic discount factor, and that's what we have. Our discount factor, our estimated discount factor is on average in the populations of about 0.7, And that translated to individuals are planning weeks ahead, not years ahead. And our assumptions is, is actually quite intuitive. Our assumption is that when you consume, let's say you consume a laundry detergent, and as you consume, you use up, your bottle may become lighter and lighter, but your bottle is still there. Right, your bottle is still there. It still occupies just as much space as before.
So the storage cost remains sort of lumpy.
That exactly. The storage cost is very lumpy, and in most cases, and we are taking advantage of this assumption. And therefore we are able to basically see that, hey, when people reduce their consumption, reduce their inventory at home, for people who are very forward-looking, the less inventory they have, they should, to what extent they react to the price discount. That will give us some information about how forward-looking they are. And how much they stockpile. That kind of behavior can tell us how forward-looking a consumer is.
Right. So if I understand this correctly, Andrew, if you make all those more realistic assumptions, let's say, the discount rate drops quite dramatically from 99% to 71%. So am I reading this correctly, that would mean that a lower discount rate means that the customer would store less or more?
So everything's the same. Let's say they're facing exactly the same pricing process done by the retailers or supermarkets, and they have the same amount of inventory at home, they have the same consumption rate. A consumer with a lower discount factor, when they face a discount, when they when they face a temporary promotion, they should stockpile less.
Yes. Okay. And so this has implications for the merchants from a policy perspective. So you say one would overpredict the effect of increased promotional depth for a product on its quantity sold by 18% the short term and 15% the long term. So when merchants, they have their own models, I would imagine, when they optimize promotions, and their expectations, if I understand this correctly, Andrew, need to be sort of tempered in terms of how much the consumer is likely to stockpile?
That's right. Yeah. So if retailers are using, if they're using a sophisticated model like this type, then and they use the discount factor that was calibrated in the previous research, then they will overestimate that the optimal promotion
I mean, so it's a big deal because if you come up with some sort of profitability jump based on how much extra you can sell, and you adjust your price accordingly, but you're not going to sell that much, right? So you're
they might be surprised, yes, and they may think the model is not doing well, but it's actually just it could be just one parameter they didn't get right, and that's very interesting. I want to jump into another paper entitled "A Structured Model of Correlated Learning and Late Mover Advantages: The Case for Statins." So before we get to statins, the basic idea here is that you have a structural model of correlated learning and indirect inference to explain late mover advantages. And so if somebody comes into market with some features of a fairly complex product, the idea here is that the latecomer, the late entrant into that market could have some advantages, right? Yeah, so the late mover can potentially in the paper what we call the free rider information provided by the incumbents.
Yeah.
Yes, and so they gain it's not all bad, of course, being late, there are some disadvantages as well, but that's by being able to leverage and free ride some information provided by your incumbents about the class of products that you try to get into, that you try to sell, that makes the late mover, to actually help them in terms of doing product awareness and informing consumers about how to use their products and things like that, they don't have to spend money on that. And in fact, if they have some advantages, they have some product features that are better than their competitors. In our model, we show that by just highlighting those features and then free ride information provided by the incumbents, they can actually they can beat the incumbents fairly quickly.
Right. Yeah, and so you have a case in here about the statins, the cholesterol reducing drugs, and Lipitor is sort of a late entrant into the market. Pharmaceuticals is quite an interesting area because there are two things. One is the information that you talk about in the paper, but there is also a risk revelation that happens. So statins being a class of chemical, if somebody enters in that class and you can find out, sort of what the risk of that class of chemical might be, it gives you two pieces of information. You may need to adjust the economics of entering that market, or you may want to tweak the product in such a way that you can take that risk factor or reduce that risk factor, right?
Right. Yeah. So in general, yes, I think you described it quite well in general. Yes.
Yeah, and so and this is applicable, Andrew, only in sort of complex products, right? Computers, phones, pharmaceuticals, and so is there some sort of a threshold complexity? I don't know if I'm asking the question correctly. That Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, it's a good question, but I think it's hard to really draw a line to say a level of complexity, and so I think, but I'll give you another example that may help.
Yeah.
And which is an example that we discussed towards the end of the paper in the conclusion part. Let's think about iPhone, right? When Apple launched iPhone, it's so new, the concept.
Mm-hmm.
It's very new, and people didn't think that a phone with a touch screen can do so much stuff.
Right.
And Apple have set up Apple stores, let people go in, play with it, and teach them what this device can do for you. And so this involves a lot of investment in providing information about this product, in educating the consumers. And so they are very, it makes a splash, obviously, and even today, 15 years later, we're still using a phone that is pretty much the same design.
Right.
But iPhone didn't hold on to the market leader position.
Right.
For not even for a year. Samsung, after 6 months, immediately launched a product that look very similar.
Yeah.
Right? They run not iOS, but they run Android operating system.
Right.
And when they launch it, they already, they don't have to educate the consumers what this device can do for them, because Apple has already done that for them.
Right.
However, what they do is they launch their phone is a bigger screen size, and they, in the same price, you get more memory, and you get a little bit faster processor, and consumers sort of think, oh, these are the features I can see, I understand, so if I get a phone bigger than an iPhone, that's even more convenient. and I get even more memories in the phone, and so I don't have to run into this memory constraints. So they can sort of extrapolate what they learn from iPhone to the Samsung phone, and conclude, and by the time they decide to buy a Samsung phone instead of iPhone, these kind of extrapolations may lead to the conclusion that Samsung phone is a better choice for them.
So, since the innovating company knows this, Andrew, strategically, they could raise some entry barriers. One of them would be patents, I would imagine, right?
Yes, indeed. Yes, and that was the case. And Samsung and Apple was engaged in these patent litigations for years because of this. Because of this, the Samsung launch of their smartphone with operating system user interface that looks similar to iPhone.
Yeah, it's almost like an optimization problem for the innovating company, that it has to basically have a horizon that the product is going to be effective in, and try to figure out. So feature introductions into the market during over that horizon, there might be optimum timing for those feature introductions, right, to maximize profits.
Theoretically, yes. Theoretically, yeah. But it's really hard to quantify those factors that help us to determine what the optimal timing is. Yeah.
Do you know companies do that or no? They sort of wing it, so to speak.
That's a good question. I think for tech companies, very big tech companies these days, like Amazon, and they are really moving towards the direction that building up a big group of researchers who have PhD in economics, computer science, operation research, engineering. They have a huge team of people working on things like this, models, and they do it in-house. So they, I know some colleagues working there. They moved from academics to join Amazon. So there are attempts on doing things like this, what we just talked about. Now, that being said, they are business, so they have to make business decisions quite fast. And so my understanding is that it's still difficult for them to sort of wait for a few years to develop a model and put everything program it before you launch it. But they have the talents in their company that understand all these theoretical factors. And so even when they are making decisions, I think they make a pretty good educated guess.
I want to jump into another paper. Zero, not always a special price. 330,000 consumer drug choices give no support for the zero price effect. So this is Swedish data, 330,000 consumer choices of medically equivalent drugs to study the zero price effect. What exactly is the zero price effect?
Okay, so the zero price effect, so this is actually a working paper, the one that you're looking at. We're revising it. And so I can tell you our research design, but in terms of the final result, the working paper versions, the result may not be final. So I just want to make a remark here. The zero price effect is something that the consumer behavior researchers and behavior economists have documented in the lab before. And so what they basically documented is that when you lower the price of two alternatives, so one is maybe charge higher price than another one. And so they started the first experiments. They one is chocolate. So there are two types of chocolates. One is a more expensive type of chocolate, and another one is much more reasonably priced chocolate.
Yeah.
And so, if you just set a normal price, you will see maybe, 30%, let's say 50-50. I don't remember exactly so, but it doesn't matter that much. I'll just describe the qualitative finding of their research.
Right.
So that was research started by Dan Eddy and his co-author. And so let's just say, when you use the regular price, the market, the choice share from the subject is about 50-50. Right? And then it showed that, okay, let's lower the price simultaneously for both products by the same amount.
Yeah.
And with the price difference is the same. So within a certain range, you don't expect people change their choice that much.
Same amount, not same percentage, right?
Same amount, yeah. So in the experiment, if I remember correctly, they keep the price difference to be the same.
Yeah.
Right, and so they see, okay, when you lower the price, the market, the choice share remains unchanged. Even when you lower the price up to just the cheapest product, and per piece of chocolate, you see, you see the change a little bit, but not dramatically. But when you lower the price from 1 cent, okay, for the cheapest product to 0, and then for the more expensive one, you also lower it by another 1 cent, you suddenly see a lot more people buy the cheapest product. So they argue this is evidence that 0 is something special in triggering some kind of hidden consumer psychology process in their mind.
Right.
And so after their research, they have found there are other researchers that also documents zero price effects in other products categories. And when you think about it, that you might feel that sometimes when you see something free, then you get more excited, and you feel that you're more eager to just try to get it. And there are different theories to explain that. So in our working paper, what we try to argue is, what we try to investigate is in the pharmaceutical products, are we also going to find zero price effect? So we use the data from Sweden, and the data in Sweden, it turns out that the institutional settings in Sweden makes it very suitable for us to investigate this zero price effect. And what happened is, in Sweden, it's national healthcare, and so everybody is covered by the government, including the prescription drugs, and the way that the government determined how much you pay for each prescription, depending on your total out-of-pocket expense up to that point. And so now, if you have not spent anything yet, your first prescriptions, you will need to pay 100%. But if you have spent, for example, $100, now I don't remember the exact number, but let's just say, for example, after you have spent $100 on prescription drug expenditures, then you hit to the next tier. Now you are qualified a discount, and so the government will only require to pay 75% for the prescription if you choose the cheapest product. And by cheapest, it means within what they call the exchange group. And so there are when a drug, a chemical, is marketed by generic firms as well, then there are multiple manufacturers, multiple options offered to the patients. And so in Sweden, the price kind of fluctuates a little bit. Which one is the cheapest? It varies from time to time. That's because the government ask the manufacturers to submit a bid 2 months later. So like for next month price, they have to already tell the government. Let's say, for example, now it's September, and if I am one of the companies, let's say Mylan, I have to tell the government in November. That's the price that we will charge for this drug.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so the government gather all this data, and then they will see which company charged the lowest price, and they will say this is the price, this is the drug of the month, so if a patient chooses that drug, then they pay. They would just pay the co-payment that they're qualified.
Yeah.
But if they pick a more expensive drug, then they have to pay the price difference as well.
Right.
Okay. So what happened is when they set up the co-payment structure into tiers, and so the more out-of-pocket expense you make, you have accumulated. And if you pass some threshold, then you qualify for the lower tier, lower co-payment tier.
Right.
And so towards the very last part is zero. So if you spend enough, you will not need to, when you fill the prescription, as long as you pick the drug of the month, you need to pay anything. You get zero code. You face zero price.
Yeah.
But right before that, right before you hit that, the last tier, then you pay 10% of the pocket expense. Right? So we see that this is actually very similar to the lab experiments that previous researchers have done. So we see this, okay, as a counterpart of lab experiments. This is kind of a natural experiments that we observe in the field. And they are not college students who choose these products. These are real people who need to consume these products. Right. And so that addresses some common criticisms of lab research when you just use very selected samples. How much you can generalize the results to the general populations. And now I'm not criticizing those research. I see a lot of values of using lab experiments to study theories, and I myself use that as well. But here we have a sort of very unique opportunity for us to investigate the zero price hypothesis in the prescription drug setting. And so we might, what the previous research have argued is for products that are, they call it more hedonic, as opposed to utilitarian. The more hedonic those products are, the more likely that we'll see a zero price effect.
Okay, so let me understand this, Andrew. So if you take a product like chocolate, let's say there is a high price one at $5, there is a lower price one at $4. You continue to reduce the price of both equally. You don't actually see any difference. And till you hit the $4 chocolate to zero, then suddenly you see a big effect. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah.
The pharmaceuticals, it's a little bit about a complex situation, but I also wondered if there is a difference, and that is if the consumer is using the price differential as a proxy for quality difference between the two products, the high price and the low price one, it wouldn't really make any difference in the sense that, so let's say instead of chocolate, it's drugs now, 5 and 4, and then you continue to lower that and one of them hits zero, you still have that $1 differential between zero and, the higher price one is $1. And if the consumer is really thinking that represents the quality differential between the two, couldn't you argue that there should not be any difference in that case?
So I think, in the pharmaceutical setting, it is not like we see, big changes of prices over time.
Yeah.
So I don't think I can see theoretically, some people draw inference that higher price, better quality, and we have control over that in our regression analysis.
Okay.
And in the sense that there is a brand name products there, and so the brand name drugs, they charge higher price, but all other generic drugs, they charge very competitive prices. So I don't think among the generic drugs, some price differences will lead to some consumers to think, okay, well, one generic drugs may be better than another one. And I kind of feel this is a secondary factor.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's go into another paper. How much do consumers know about the quality of products? Evidence from the
I like that one. Yes.
evidence from the diaper market, and so you're to measure the extent of incomplete information about brand qualities faced by consumers. Recent research in marketing and economics has extended traditional static choice models to explicitly allow for consumer learning. And these models tend to be complicated and make stringent assumptions such as Bayesian updating. And in this paper, you provide a simpler alternative method to measure how much consumers know about the quality of a quasi-durable product, right? You want to talk about that?
Yes. So so you like me to just talk about how we, what is the main ideas behind this paper?
Yeah.
So so a lot of this, consumer learning is one area of my research, and so what you see is that in this literature, what we call choice modeling, in conjoint analysis, and market research or consumer demand research in economics, people use these choice models a lot.
Yeah.
Now, one thing that is tricky is oftentimes we use this model to try to infer how people think about the quality of the products. And this is what we call revealed preferences. And essentially, we are making this assumption that consumer choice is a function of their own preferences.
Right.
And so how they perceive the quality of different products will be reflected in their choices.
Yeah.
So in other words, if they perceive that iPhone is better than Samsung phone, you would anticipate more people will choose iPhone, right? So from the choice that we can infer that iPhone is a better product than Samsung phone. Now that's just say, for example, I don't necessarily mean which product is actually better.
Yeah.
But that's the idea. However, this type of inference also have a caveat, and the caveat is the perceived quality or the quality that you back out from this approach is really a perceived quality. It's not necessarily the true quality of the product. But perceived, I mean, that at the time when you make the transactions, it could involve decision under uncertainty.
Right.
And you just don't know all the true quality, how durable this product is, for example. So you buy this product based on your belief about how durable this product is. Right? And for example, cars, you might choose that's maybe one of the factors you consider, how durable the car is. So now, then how do we know? How do we know over time? Do people actually learn? And also, is it really the case that when people make their choices, they really don't know the true quality of the products?
Yeah.
So it's very difficult using just choice to learn that. And in the previous research, we're building learning models to try to have a learning process explicitly modeled, and then estimate these complicated learning models to address this. But in this paper, that's not what we do. In this paper, we have a much simpler idea. Going back to the durability, So this is what this paper could be useful for a durable good.
Yeah.
So you can imagine for products that are durable, you don't need to replace it as often.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So it's car. If you have a car that's very durable, you can use it for 10, 15 years. But if the car is not that reliable, you may have to, if it breaks down too often, you decided to replace it after a couple of years.
Right.
And so just looking at not just what brands people buy, not just the brand share or the choice share of the products.
Mm-hmm.
What we can also look at is how often people replace a product. Or in other words, the purchase frequencies.
Right.
For durable goods. So because it reflects how durable the product is.
Right.
And so that's the idea that we use in choice data, in this kind of supermarket data. We actually also see how often people buy the same products again, right? And those are the products that we call it not, but we can still interpret how long a product lasts as some kind of like durability, what we call quasi durability. Right, so we use the example of diaper, and you can imagine a good diaper, a better diaper may be able to store more and it lasts longer. And so you don't have to change the diaper for a baby. If it's a high quality diaper, maybe the baby feel comfortable wearing it for whole night.
Right.
But a diaper with a lower quality, maybe less comfortable, the baby may complain after a few hours, right? And then you have to replace it. So by observing, the quantity people bought, and we also see for different brands how often people need to replace it, need to buy again, right? That itself, this in the purchase time, controlling for how many pieces that you bought before, give us the information about the durability of the products.
Right.
So that's how we try to measure and use this information to measure more objective quality instead of what we call subjective quality, just based on the brand choice.
Right. But so are you
compare them? Yeah.
So are you saying the paper that the consumer observes in the purchase duration and uses that as a proxy for quality and makes decisions? So when you have a longer in the purchase duration, there's a higher chance the consumer sticks to the same brand?
No, that's not necessarily the case. So we don't make that assumption.
Okay.
What we assume is that when you buy, which brand you buy reflects your perceptions about how good that brand is. Right. So it's possible that you might think, what we basically assume is the durability, how often you have to replace a product. In the case of diaper, for example, is really dictated not by your perceptions. Is dictated by your baby, how your baby really feel about that diaper. And so in that sense, when the baby complains, if the baby doesn't know what brand you bought, right? And so, which I think is a clean way to measure the quality, at least one dimension of quality, how this quasi durability. But when someone buy a brand, they may still be influenced by all this advertising and their friends, their family members. It could be that a store brand is actually as good as a brand name products like Pampers, right?
Yeah.
But a parent may still feel, okay, I need to get something better for my baby, and somehow I thought Pampers is better than a store brand.
But is there evidence that consumers know that, Andrew? So you're suggesting a simpler alternative method to measure how much consumers know. Is there evidence that the consumers use these types of heuristics to measure quality?
I think so. Yeah, there are definitely in consumer behavioral research, and in choice modeling, in even quantitative marketing research, we recognize this. We recognize that people don't have complete information about the products that they face. And there are a lot of external stimuli, advertising, or the way, the store settings, display advertising, feature advertising, all this can influence somebody buying decisions.
Right.
And so in other words, that affect their perceived quality at that moment when they make the transactions.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
And so that can distort, those things can distort their beliefs. That can distort the how they think about the brand, how they think about the quality. So what we propose is, I think that the main highlight in our paper really is that in the data that marketing researchers use or economists use a lot, this scanner data that is available in supermarket, they actually contain more information than most people know. Purchase time, and this in the purchase time, this panel data measure of this dimension of data is also offering a chance to measure at least one type of quality, and that is not pointed out in the previous research.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I want to close
once
with.
you have that, you have two different measures of quality. Then you can then check, do people actually know the durability or not?
Right. Okay, so I want to close with another one. So a heuristic approach to explore the value of perfect information. You say, how do people make choices in a dynamic stochastic environment when they face uncertainty about the return of their choices? The classical approach to this problem is to assume consumers use dynamic programming to obtain the optimum decision rules. However, this approach has two drawbacks. So talk about the drawbacks of that approach.
Oh, do you mean the standard approach?
The standard approach, yeah.
The standard approach is essentially, in that approach, this dynamic programming approach assume individuals are extremely smart. Let's put it that way. So that approach assume individuals is able to solve a dynamic programming problem. Now, that may not be a fair way to say that. It's more like, we as researchers, when we use that kind of model, we don't literally think individuals will use that model in their mind, but more like, how they act as if operated according to this model. So it's like as if model. And now the drawback is, it is, first, to really put it in practice, this type of model is very difficult to solve computationally.
Yeah, I can tell you, Andrew, that even in large R&D environments where you need dynamic programming to get to optimum role, when you have staged investments, many few firms in Fortune 500 actually do that.
Yes, that's right. So even firms, that they don't do that, right? But I mean, the tech companies explore this type of models. They are doing this now, and yet with consumer is a good way to model consumers. I think that's an open research question. So that's in our research using heuristic rules is one way for us to sort of offer alternative to the existing approach in marketing and economics.
Yeah.
And I think it's reasonable to ask that questions. That there are heuristic models out there that help us to look at how how agents make decisions under uncertainty, and those are the kind of models that are indicated by computer scientists and engineers. Now in their mind, they don't really think of those models as the way to describe how individuals think. They think of that as more like, they have to program a robot
Right.
to explore something.
Yeah.
And so they are trying to find an efficient way to explore and exploit, new options. And but what we are asking is, hey, there are some very efficient rules that the computer scientists have discovered. Wouldn't that be possible that these rules, these type of heuristic models, could be a better way to describe how individuals actually behave? And so that's how that's what motivates our research.
Okay, so it's sort of creating rules or heuristics by almost trial and error of a very limited subset of information, and then you run a number of different trials, and over time you get a heuristic that works for you.
So there are different ideas behind these kind of heuristic approaches. There could be some like what you described that are it's kind of more naive type of learning. But there are the one that we pick, and there's some that's the only one, but the one that we think and the things that I think Rani and I are more interested in, they are reasonable. When you hear that heuristic rules, you will see there's some sophistication there, and yet they're fairly easy to use.
Right.
And so it's not like completely naive, and you can sort of, when you hear it, your first reaction, that sounds like a reasonable approach. That seems like a smart approach. Although if someone is familiar with dynamic programming, then they may say, hey, but that's not completely right. If I take all the information into account, that will lead to different outcomes or different choices. And that's right, but that's exactly why we believe we can compare these two type of models and see which one describe individual behavior better.
And so it's interesting, Andrew. As you know, when real options sort of became popular in the 90s, there was a lot of research around. We actually find nobody inside a firm, no manager inside a firm using real options typically. Typically, managers make decisions based on gut feel and heuristics.
Yes.
Often they can't really explain how they made the decisions either. And these are multi-billion-dollar decisions they seem to make on the fly. And so I think it's reasonable to assume that no consumer is going to do a multi-stage dynamic programming a model to make, to buy diapers, for example, right? And so
yes, I think that's right. I think for grocery products,
but what's
like that,
what might also be interesting to think about is, the one research question might be that as complexity and data increase, it becomes more and more difficult to create heuristics, I would argue, because you need more data, you need more trials, you need more systematic view of the results of those trials. And so is it possible that the decisions made by consumers will become less and less efficient as more data become available?
I'm not sure if I would totally agree this viewpoint, and I can see from the firm's point of view, when more and more data are available, they can potentially measure individuals' heterogeneity better, and they can the technology as it improves, the computational power and all this, that would allow firms to be able to uncover individual decision rules more and more precisely. And from there, and by that, the decision rules, I mean more like a reduced form decision rules. But that is a good starting point for us to then do more reverse engineering to uncover what heuristic rules people are using under different circumstances.
Yeah, I was
And
just
so, but I would not necessarily think that then it would change the consumers the way they use heuristics.
Hmm.
Yeah, that seems to be what you're talking about.
Yeah, I was just wondering, so VPI, you got a value perfect information. The consumer has some sort of a process that is much less complicated than what mathematically we would want to do.
Mm-hmm.
And they reach that process by trial and error, by experimentation. I was just wondering, in a world of lot more choices and lot more features for different choices,
Mm.
there is an explosion of data.
Mm-hmm.
And so at some point, the consumers, yesterday's heuristic is not valid for today's
I
decision,
see.
right? And then the
Yeah, yeah.
consumer is sort
I
of
think
lost.
that could be.
Yeah.
I think I see where you're going. Let's just say the development of search engines becomes a lot more efficient. I mean, it's
Yeah,
already becoming very quite efficient, and but this search engine can change the way that people use heuristic.
that's true. Yeah.
Uh, Now, before search engines available, one can argue that if I'm thinking to buy, let me see, what are the things that I try to consider? Well, I was thinking to buy like 3-step ladder, tools that can help me, reach the top shelf.
Hmm.
And in the past, I may not care about that much. I just go to a store, I see it's available in this Home Depot. I will just pick it up and pay for it. But now,
Okay.
with the search engine, it makes it so much easier for me to figure out the price of different stores. I might actually spend time on looking into those information.
Yeah. So technologies that reduce the search cost for consumers could become more and more valuable as we go forward, potentially.
It is, yeah, yeah. On one hand, it becomes more valuable. On the other hand, I think um, I actually had a discussion with my students just last week
Yeah.
on exactly this, and I think it's very interesting. He pointed out that because of the search engines become so common now,
Hmm.
he found that he actually spent more time on doing this kind of shopping, tiny
Right.
things,
Yeah.
and so he ended up, actually when he looked back, I wish I didn't spend so much time. I wish I didn't spend an hour on figuring out and how to, pick the best products for something that's only worth $10.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. So is that actually, I think these kind of tools, we hope it will help us. But at the same time, I think there is a catch. We need to uh, we need to be a little bit more careful. Would that actually get us into, sometimes we call in the behavior economics we call gamifications,
Hmm.
and we fall into this pitfall that turn every buying decision process into a game.
Right.
And so then you might end up just spending way too much time on a buying decision process sometimes, even though you thought it's actually more convenient.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Excellent, Andrew. This has been great. Thanks so much for spending time with me, and
Thank
good
you.
luck with
Thank
this
you, Gill. It
research.
was really fun. I really enjoyed our discussion.
Thanks so much. Bye.
Yep. Thank you. Bye.